All right, let's try to get to the bottom of this story. So you probably have heard or seen, or maybe you're involved in, maybe you're actually putting money into these markets. They are called prediction markets, and they allow you as the user to place a bet on the outcome of virtually anything, any real world event. And I keep saying like war, like in Iran. And then, of course, I remember when the U.S., got into Venezuela, to grab Nicolas Maduro, their president. Someone had actually bet on that. It was a big story in the news at the time. A lot of money was made on that, and it kind of raises the question, well, how would anybody know that might have been something that might happen? Well, and that's where the ethical issue, I believe, comes into play here. So let's try to find out more. Werner Antweiler is an economics professor at UBC's Sauder School of Business, and he is on the line. Mr. Antweiler, with respect to why this is an ethical concern, I mean, outside of perhaps people having inside information, what's the big concern here?
Well, there's also a significant risk of market manipulation when people actually know the outcome in advance of something that could actually lead to not only insider trading, but people trying to influence how an event actually shapes up. For example, events can be fixed in sports events, or there are all kinds of avenues through which information can be used in a profitable way, the same way it has been done in betting already. And so the big question really is on a prediction market really like gambling, and is it prone to the same problems we have seen with gambling?
So, I mean, sports betting online has become obviously a huge business, and I understand the part, and we know there have already been some scandals involved, right, in sports betting where people, we found that after the fact, were involved in either, missing shots or making shots, whatever the sport happened to be. How is this any different?
Yeah, it's really not all that different because prediction markets are just a form of trading on outcome, where the trading is essentially a little bit more continuous. You don't just place a wager, but you can actually change your position as new information arrives. But at the end of the day, it really looks a lot like gambling because what you're trading in are so-called binary options, where it is an outcome that is like something happens or doesn't happen, and it's not like a continuous outcome as in a typical futures market like for a commodity like oil. So it's, in that sense, really a lot like betting and not like trading.
So I would ask as well, and it's worth noting, obviously when you bet or when you involve yourself in this, you're doing this anonymously, right? Nobody knows who you are. That information's not released either.
Yeah, and that is a big problem because now people can hide behind cryptocurrencies and other ways actually of and not really revealing who they are. So we don't know who people are who are participating in poly market or culture or other commercial markets. And so if there is wrongdoing that's alleged, then there is no way for government authorities actually to find out now is somebody actually breaking the law here.
So what are you asking to be done? And our governments, obviously they're aware of this. Are they suggesting something needs to change here as well?
Well, here in Canada, we have a restriction on binary options trading that came from the Ontario Securities Commission, then was also mirrored elsewhere in Canada. That limits trading, and the only entities that are legally allowed to operate prediction markets are Simple and interactive brokers, and only for a very limited set of contracts and financial derivatives, essentially, and in environmental outcomes. So, well, here in Canada, the problem isn't with what is being allowed to do. It's really the participation in international markets that where people sort of bypass restrictions that these markets have on participants from Canada by using VPN or hiding their identity.
Which you can obviously do, and it's not that difficult to actually do that, right? If you're using a virtual private network to get around these laws. I wonder, though, anytime you talk about a lucrative, offering in this case, the potential for so much money to be made, these things tend to come across the border and will end up here. Is that part of your concern?
Yeah, there's definitely the worries that what's being allowed in the United States is sort of trying to get a foothold here in Canada. And I think regulators really need to be very careful because if it's like gambling, it should be regulated like gambling with all the kinds of problems that gambling comes with, and that need to be looked into as an addictive kind of activity, and one ultimately where most people lose. There's new research that just came out of colleagues actually from Toronto and HEC Montreal that actually shows that who brings money, it's always the service providers, so the prediction market operator that makes the money. And prediction markets can be quite efficient in the forecast. And so you can't really make a lot of money in a prediction market simply because these markets are already quite efficient. So the only people who make money in a prediction market are either the ones with advanced knowledge, and so who engage in insider trading, or who are actually operating the market so providing liquidity. These are called market makers. And they basically exploit the fact that many participants participants in these markets are not very sophisticated and don't provide liquidity on the right side of the market. And so they exploit those opportunities, and that is where the money is being made. That's where the business model is.
Yeah, I hate to say it this way, but I would think in the case of like sports betting models, right, where provinces actually get a cut of, the money that's being made out there that the companies make, that's a pretty big incentive to want to get involved in something like this, because you're describing, I think, what could be worth hundreds of millions of dollars in potential revenue here.
Precisely, and that's the reason why the governments, especially the provincial governments, should be very careful here and make sure that their monopoly on gambling and gaming isn't actually being eroded by these entrants that are basically calling themselves prediction markets but are really offering gambling services in disguise.
Well, look, as you mentioned, in Canada, we only have two. You mentioned the two, I think, right? Interactive Brokers and Wealthsimple, the only two prediction markets that are allowed in here. Do you see a move in the U.S., because this is now something you can do in there, by governments to push back against this or not?
Well, the U.S. actually has a pretty mixed attitude towards the current administration has been kind of opening the door to it, but there's already pushback in Congress to actually legislate because there are clearly problems that are seen. And in particular, many states actually also have, like here in Canada, a monopoly on gambling, and they are going to lose revenue if these markets take off. So they are pushing back hard because it's really stepping on their toes.
All right. We will leave it at that. I thank you so much for the time. Appreciate your insight.
Unmistakably Canadian.
It's the music that raised you.
The artists raising the bar.
Hi, this is Brian Adams.
Hey, my name's Brett Emmons. I'm from the Glorious Sons.
Hi, I'm Nelly Furtado.
Made in Canada. The station that champions Canadian music.
Loud, proud, and all yours.
No passports required. Just press play.
Tap into Made in Canada now on iHeartRadio.ca
or the free iHeartRadio app.